Oh, poor George. Oh, poor Pierre. They have now found themselves with a promise broken. The Japanese Grand Prix was alright, but it made me realise something that I touched upon in my video from yesterday, that there are two teams dealing with an inter-team battle either in the making or is starting to bubble up to the surface. We saw team orders with McLaren, and yes, Oscar was a little spicy for a couple of laps, and Lando was a little bit impatient, but it didn't really impact the order for both drivers in the end. They ended up where they were supposed to be. But with these two teams, I'm starting to think that it's not going to end well. George Russell and Pierre Gasly. Concerning the situation with team instructions. That's the new buzzword at the moment, right? So we all knew that when Alpine signed Pierre Gasly, after Gasly got bored of the AlphaTauri way of doing things and realizing that he's not going to get a place at Red Bull again, and went to Alpine, a French team, and hopefully, maybe more of a better time, potentially being taken seriously as his own driver. But what's becoming very clear, it's not working out that way. Esteban Ocon and he have not exactly seen eye to eye over their racing career, and even though Alpine and they have actually been saying to us that they put that difference aside, that they're gonna work together for the betterment of their own team, nothing's gonna happen, I promise. The thing is though, the more times you mention it and that you promise it's not gonna happen, it's gonna happen. Culminating in Japan, where we saw Pierre Gasly really boil after the whole situation regarding driver swaps and him having a really big tantrum. I'm really glad I didn't hear the radio for that. I would imagine he would have been fuming. But why has it come to this? Well, it all started when Pierre went to Alpine. We all thought that this was going to be a really bad idea after Alpine had made some really bad decisions with contracts, with Oscar Piastri leaving and Fernando Alonso leaving as well. They thought that they could maybe patch the wound up a little bit with Pierre Gasly. I mean, after all, he's a really good driver. He's won a race. He knows what it takes to win a race. He's won about as much as Esteban Ocon has, which is once. And, you know, two French drivers in a French team, even though it's technically based in Enston, well, it looks really good, right? You can definitely tell that the social media department of Alpine are determined to make sure that nobody suspects a thing, that these two drivers get along famously. Really making that clear to us. But it all started to begin in Australia. Yes, I know it was a complete accident. It was absolute bedlam at the beginning of that restart, and those two drivers just so happened to crash into one another. A double DNF, but it was most likely not deliberate. But the fact is, though, it happened, and it was the beginning of concerns with that driver lineup. It wasn't favourable, but people quickly dismissed it because, you know, it's just once, it's fine. You get to Hungary, and the same thing happens again. They both, indirectly, take each other out. I'm very quick to say that it was down to a case of Zhou Guanyu taking up bowling, or as I like to call it, hashtag Zhouling, that these two were eliminated. It compromised their race, and I'm pretty sure that tensions would have been brewing. Then, of course, you had Otmar Safnauer being sacked, and that led to even more problems. But then you had a glimmer of hope with Pierre Gasly getting a podium. You know, that was something good, yeah, okay. But then Suzuka. It's then started to really become apparent that there is something really bad happening. And this all had something to do with the way that Alpine supposedly does things. And you can also tell as well that the whole reason why I think Gasly has had a promise broken, this was supposed to be a team where the drivers were equal. What Esteban Ocon said afterwards was very, very telling, saying that, oh, in the 4 years that I've been here, this is just the way we do things, and Pierre still hasn't understood that? Well, that's just on him. You can tell that they really still don't like each other, even though, in a way, they're trying to be civil, but no. That's the kind of thing to say that, yeah, Esteban's the number one here because he's been there the longest. Seniority. The Alpine way of doing things is that if you go for a move and you require a driver to let you pass, if it doesn't work out for you, you let them back. That sounds kind of fair. But the whole misunderstanding that occurred afterwards was that during the undercuts and safety cars, Pierre assumed that that had already been dealt with, that this was just a one-time thing, and then after that, you could just go for whatever you wanted. Try and go for Alonso. That didn't work. He couldn't get close enough. But then Ocon was on a one-stop strategy, like George Russell, and then was given the place back. But Pierre thought that had already been done. He was on faster tyres. And besides, Ocon was 2.5 seconds behind Pierre. It's not like Ocon was being held up by Gasly or anything. It was just that they just wanted Ocon ahead for the same amount of points for the team. 1 point difference. What's the difference, really? What benefit is this going to make for the team? All it's going to do is just make Pierre angry and resentful towards Esteban, and making it even clearer in his mind that maybe this was not the thing that he was promised. I don't think this is going to really benefit Pierre in any way. It's going to now make him feel like, well, where can I flourish? Where can I be good? AlphaTauri was just holding stationary when it was clear he was not going to make it into the main Red Bull seat due to Helmut Marko being incredibly stubborn, not giving him any chance at all. We might not see things on the actual track, but the thing I'm really concerned about is that Ocon is sort of just dangling superiority in front of Pierre, as in he knows how things are run here, and if you can't handle it, then what does that make you? When you get language like that in post-race interviews, that's not really good. And in the post-race interviews, Pierre was just really dismissive, and it was just like, oh, I suppose it was just a team thing. Pierre's engineer was telling him, this is an instruction from the pit lane, do it, we'll talk about this later, means that they know that Pierre was not going to like this. So they already know that there hasn't been a good way in communicating things properly. So, I'm really thinking that Alpine is struggling at the moment, not just in terms of their performance of the car, but in their driver lineup. This was not a good match at all. The driver dynamic is just simply not there, and Pierre, now he's just, well, he's got nowhere else to go. I mean, okay, Esteban's only got 1 more year left on his contract, but I'm pretty sure that Alpine will extend that further because he's now the bestie number 1 in that team. That is until Andretti buys them out or another team buys them out, because it is quite clear that the Alpine management really don't seem to be that bothered about whether they stay or not. If the right buyer comes along, or if the right shareholder buys a stake of a certain team, then there you go. Okay. All right, let's move on to the other guy that had a promise broken. George Russell. The reason why George Russell went to Mercedes was clear. He was meant to be the future of the team after Lewis Hamilton retired. When that was going to be was probably established in 2023. You serve your time at Williams, you get to Mercedes, you learn things with Lewis Hamilton, one of the all-time greats of the sport, then he retires, and then you take up the mantle. Well, that's not happened. Lewis has chosen to stick around for a couple more years, and undermining the whole spirit of why George Russell went to Mercedes in the first place, to become the team leader. And it's especially being undermined even further because George scored more points than Lewis in 2022, and that was establishing him as the anti-Bottas, that he was not going to be like Valtteri in allowing Lewis to do what he wants. And you're getting time and time again many hints that Lewis wishes that Valtteri did not have to go, but Valtteri did have to go, because Toto had promised George a seat. He had been at Williams for 3 years and they weren't really going anywhere, although they were kind of in 2021. And George was actually really good there. Maybe he should have stayed 1 more year, just to kind of get Williams on their feet. Alongside Alex Albon? Not too bad. Then again, you had Latifi money and stuff. But then again, last year, Williams did say they didn't need Latifi's money. They gave him another year out of good grace for the loyalty he provided and the money keeping them afloat at a dire time before they got the Doralton investment. George was promised something, he's not got it. And you can tell he is fuming. This is not the arrangement that we could also see emulated with Michael Schumacher and Felipe Massa in 2006. The year that Michael Schumacher retired and Felipe Massa spent a year alongside one of the all-time greats of the sport. And he did learn a lot of things, which carried over to 2008, when Massa built a title challenge against Lewis Hamilton. I don't want to talk about the aftermath and the trying to rewrite history that we're getting currently, but at the time, Massa was trained by Michael, and 2 years later, he was going for the title. There you go. 2022, people are a little bit concerned about the situation regarding Russell and Hamilton, but not really. They got along at a time when the team was really struggling. They sort of stuck together. We were wowed by George's consistency, them actually getting a good position in the Constructors' Championship, despite the fact that they were just moaning all the time about going, oh, our car is the worst, our car is the worst. You're still in the top 3, mate. Calm down. W14 comes along, the beginning of the year, George handles it better. Lewis then goes into the headlines in the media saying, well, they didn't listen to my advice and I don't feel the car's really geared towards me. And then eventually things are talked about, and then the car, lo and behold, ends up being geared towards Lewis. George is the one that struggles. George is now feeling frustrated, and now he's taking it out by basically being defiant, trying to tell everyone that I'm meant to be the future of Mercedes, I'm not going down without a fight. And all this is going to do is undermine everything that Mercedes were trying to put in store after 2016, with team orders really making things difficult and awkward for the last couple of years of Nico Rosberg's career. So we're seeing George now getting really frustrated, and that's not a good look. And then you see Lewis getting frustrated and George getting frustrated. I started to see a pattern here, that George Russell is the Mercedes equivalent of Charles Leclerc at Ferrari. Both drivers were put on a pedestal, the mascot of the Mercedes brand and the Ferrari brand respectively, but then having too much pressure put on them for them to actually perform and thinking, oh, they're the future greats, they're gonna do wonders, they are so fantastic, and they've not had cars in which to be able to maximize their potential. They feel rushed, they're both in a hurry, and lo and behold, they make mistakes, and then everybody digs on them and going, oh, they weren't as good as we thought they were gonna be. But the point remains, is that George is in a hurry, he is keen to tell everyone that he is the future of Mercedes, and then Lewis comes along, extending his contract, and breaking the promise that he was given by Toto in 2022 that you just gotta do a couple of seasons behind Lewis and then you'll get your chance to lead the team. He is going to spend 4 seasons effectively now running behind Lewis or fighting him. And that's what we've been seeing throughout the season. Now, of course, people now point to the moment in Spain where they touched and front wings went everywhere. Well, okay, I'm not really going to chalk that up too much. That seemed a genuine mistake. They were quick to brush that under the carpet. But I will remind you about Jeddah. Lewis then had his tyres fade away, he couldn't make the move, and therefore that race was compromised. That was the beginning of the rumblings there, and that's when, of course, Lewis asked for the development to go back towards his favour. Then things were alright. In Spain, you did get them getting a double podium. They seemed quite chatty and harmonious. Then you get to Singapore. That whole situation of George being hounded by Lewis, desperate to stay ahead, desperate to try and prove himself, go for his second win. He felt like he had to prove something, just like Charles Leclerc does at Ferrari, and then he makes a mistake. He was too stubborn. And Lewis also was at fault for being too aggressive, and Mercedes were at fault as well for not actually making any team orders sooner. They are almost paralyzed with fear about team orders. They are now starting to realize that maybe we have to. Because we did see that at Suzuka. George didn't like that at all, trying to prove to them like, guys, I can come up with good strategies on the fly like Carlos, let's do the DRS trick. And then they're like, no, George, just do it. Then at fault as well, Lewis being overly aggressive to get past, forcing George off. They're going to make a mistake soon. When they actually collide, I can tell there is going to be the biggest flashpoint where George and Lewis will connect, there will be talks, there will be discussions, which I think did occur after Suzuka, because that was really close. If there hadn't been tarmac where Spoon Curve is, that would have been George off, damaging his floor, compromising him even further. So I'm feeling like those two drivers need to actually establish what's going on here for the sake of the Constructors' Championship. Because at the moment, Lewis is going for second place in the Drivers' Championship, and Mercedes really need to hold off Ferrari from getting second in the Constructors, because otherwise, this discord, which is really unlike Mercedes for the last few years, will actually butt them on the bum, and Ferrari, for once, the complete definition of chaos in terms of teams, might get second place, and Frederic Vasseur justified for being there. And yeah, you just feel like these two teams, Mercedes and Alpine, they are now in a state of flux, and they have two drivers whose promises that were handed to them are now being completely shattered, and they are now just going insane. This is something that we need to keep an eye on, folks. But then it just made me think, well, why is George Russell in this situation in the first place? Well, if you watch this video next, you'll begin to understand why, somehow, George Russell has become F1's most hated man.